Welcome to another episode of Maintenance Untangled, where we untangle the complexities of maintenance.
Welcome back to another episode of Maintenance Untangled. This episode, a bit of a milestone. It's our 10th episode, and obviously, as always, welcome back, Derick. 10 episodes in, you still got me in as a co-host. I don't know how you do it, mate.
Thanks, Ricky. It's awesome to be back. Thank you for having me back. It's been an interesting journey the last 10 episodes, and hopefully we can put another 0 to the 10 over the next coming years, and hopefully you'll keep on having me.
No pressure. So, Derick, given our 10th episode, what should we untangle today?
Ricky, unfortunately, we found out today has been another fatality in the industry. So we'll briefly touch on the fatality at the Tanami mine up in Northern Territory. And then from a technical topic, we're going to talk about KPIs, the big stick that nobody likes, and we'll try and bust a few myths and untangle KPIs and see if we can change people's minds that it's not the big stick.
All right, so for safety this week, Derick, you mentioned it briefly in the intro. It's always sad whenever we hear about some kind of fatality within the industry. A 47-year-old man has unfortunately passed away in the Tanami gold mines. We don't know too much, obviously, detail about it. It shows you how precious life is, Derick.
It was a bit of a shocker when you sent that to me, Ricky. So he's as old as I am, which is scary. And I mean, for me to think about me not going back home to my family, my kids, it's So our condolences to the families, the friends, the workmates, the co-workers, everybody involved. It's never good. Our condolences to them.
So, Derick, for our technical session today, KPIs, obviously, you briefly touched on about. Hopefully, we'll unpack a few myths and hopefully be able to give some information support to people out there who are listening. I suppose, what is the actual raw purpose of a KPI, Derick?
Okay, so KPIs originally was intended to either drive a specific behavior or drive a specific outcome. Now, I'll use safety KPIs, most people's aware of, or it's known. So when you start saying, okay, everybody has to put in 1 hazard a day while at work, right? So the intent is you're trying to drive a specific behavior because you're trying to get people to notice hazards within their workplace, right? So that's you're trying to change their behavior, and therefore you put it on the KPI and you start measuring it, and there's targets. The other one is if you're trying to drive a specific outcome. Now, if you want to make sure people are reviewing safe work procedures, for example, you'll say that every supervisor must do 1 planned task observation once a month, right? So, which means he has to review a safe work procedure every month. The outcome you're trying to drive is that all of your work procedures is reviewed by the end of the year. Okay, so that's the aim. So KPI is always about either a behavior or an outcome. Now, Ricky, what have you seen of the opposite of what it's actually supposed to do?
Yeah, so some of the examples I've seen is whereabouts they've had certain KPIs out just because, someone was like, this is a great idea, and obviously, at the time it drove the right behavior. But then it became to a point whereabouts, dare I say, I'll use a safety example, whereabouts a lot of people were just putting in a lot of nonsense or snot in the system because people were already familiar with how to do it. They understood the behaviour. If they see a hazard, they put it in the system. But then obviously the inverse of action, whereabouts there was just a lot of random stuff like, I don't know, using a knife the wrong way went into the system is one of them that I remember. It's kind of like that has no benefit to the business and creates more work. So
Sorry for laughing. I had one, and I'll never forget this. One of my team members put in a hazard and said there was a rock on the walkway, and then obviously the question on the hazard form is, "What did you do about it?" He said, "I kicked it out of the way." So that's where when it starts getting ridiculous, right? That's when KPIs have lost their meaning, and you're no longer actually really focusing on fine code risk, real hazards.
So, Derick, what are some really good ways to set up your KPIs in that sense? Like I'm just sort of calling out random stuff. You wouldn't give a planner, how many work orders were completed for the day in terms of an execution piece, would you?
So, Ricky, I think so. There's two aspects for me. So one you start on, from a business level. What are your key KPIs in your business? Now that's normally fairly easy. Most business is based on, what's your cost per ton or your dollar per ton rate, or what's your volume production, or what's your gold output or your iron ore output, or So there's certain key business drivers, which may or may not be linked to your bonus system. That's a different story. But so there's certain key business drivers, right? Now, when you have that, it's fine if you put those big, high corporate business drivers within people's personal KPIs as a percentage, as a portion. So say 30%, because ultimately everybody contributes to the bigger business, which is important. But then you need to really look at it. So let's say production, right? How many tons are we making? An aspect of how many tons we're making for an operational guy is how am I utilizing my equipment. So for operations personnel, you'll look at utilization. For maintenance personnel, you look at availability, because availability is important, because maintenance directly contributes to availability, right? So, and then if you think about, okay, so who contributes to availability? Well, repeat failures is for the reliability engineer, because they're the ones that's supposed to prevent repeat failures. So it's directly within their span of control. And I think that's the most important thing, is when you set up KPIs for people, is, for personal KPIs, is it within their span of control? Do they have control over, that outcome? Which can be 60% of the KPIs, 40% business, or 70% personal, 30% business. There should always be a portion of business KPIs, because everybody needs to understand, you're contributing to the bigger picture. But it's also important to have that really personal. So, for a planner, how much return work do I have to reschedule because of bad planning? That's something that's within their direct control. This is within their control. They have to. How much work am I postponing because there's no spares? Because it's within their control. They should never put it in the schedule if the spares haven't been seen, touched, prepared, ready to go. And I think that's the really important side of making sure that your KPIs are palatable and achievable, and really, have real control over it.
And I suppose flowing from that, Derick, how often should if I was a planner on site, or a reliability engineer, how often should I be looking at those KPIs? And then obviously thinking up the chain, you've got your superintendents out on site, and then you've got, your GMs. How often should they sort of be looking at or trying to really communicate information? And have you seen effective ways of that being done?
So at a lower level, I think weekly, your KPIs, you should at least look at it weekly, because it's, from week to week, it's within your control. From a planner perspective, if you look at schedule compliance, so maintenance team schedule compliance, every week you need to look at schedule compliance. How am I doing? So that's from a review perspective, are we doing well? Understanding if we don't make it, if it's a red, because we didn't get our schedule compliance because there was a major breakdown, you at least need to understand why that. Okay. But then from a measurement perspective, so talking about performance measurements for personnel, that should be viewed over a longer period, so over a quarter or 6-monthly period, because you get the blips in the weeks, but it's about what's the average. Am I doing well on average? So because there's things happen in the processing plant, it's always like that. Probably one of the best things I've seen from a senior leadership perspective is in one of my previous lives, we had what they called a town hall once a month, and everybody in the company is allowed to go and attend it, and the GM would present results for the last month. So key financial production, financial, everything else, and safety, and how we went, and then talk about what's coming up for the next month, 3 months, long-term capital things, big things that changes people's lives. He would ask, and then open the floor. Anybody can ask questions. That makes a lot of senior leadership very uncomfortable, because you are, you have to be able to face your certain decisions right there, and then people can ask you questions. But that's probably one of the best that I've seen in terms of, from a senior leadership, looking at KPIs, discussing KPIs, understanding why we're there, what are we doing to, improve, what are we continuing doing because we're doing it well, to have that discussion all the way down the chain so that everybody understands this where we're there. So, Ricky, I'm going to put you on the spot now.
Good.
Okay. So, have you seen an example, or can you give an example that you've seen where KPIs have really, really, really driven the wrong behavior?
I have seen it multiple times. One example that really stands out to me is where a certain manager, wasn't happy with the numbers. So what they actually wanted to do was manipulate how it was actually measured in the background in tools like Excel or Power BI to actually make themselves look a lot better than what was actually going on, because they didn't want the big stick or the size 12 boot to say, hey, no, your performance is, I won't say the word, not good. So it doesn't really drive the right behavior, and it sort of creates additional work in that sense. And that's one of the interesting things you do see out in the industry is everyone, as soon as the word sometimes KPI get mentioned, everyone all sort of gets a little bit nervous and stuff like that, because there's this sort of belief system out there where your KPIs have to be Mickey Mouse, spot on all the time. It's not great to have that sort of, from the intent in terms of what is the outcome or the behavior that we're trying to drive out there. So I suppose back to you, Derick. What are ways that you could probably try and combat something like that? So example being, I know we briefly talked about this before we started recording, was more or less like a schedule compliance. Let's just say there's a department out there, schedule compliance is a hunky-dory, 100% every time.
So I want to come back to a point you made earlier, but I'll pause that for a second. So on schedule compliance, which is a really good example. So I've seen operations where they only measure schedule compliance because that's the key thing. They think, well, if we comply to our schedule, we're doing our maintenance, right? And then it becomes a pure tick and flick, where the tradesman would go, take the PM, walk to the plant, then get called to something else and go, yeah, well, I spent 10 minutes on it, confirm it, it's done, and my compliance is 100% and I've done all my PMs. And one of the key things to understand is that KPIs should never be standing alone. So it should always be, so in terms of safety, so if I'm measuring hazards, for example, and there's no hazards going in, but I often get, or there's no hazards and no near misses, and my safe behavioral observations are all schmicko and nobody does anything wrong, but there's massive amount of injuries, something's not right, right? So there's a balance. The KPIs, one points to the other, one tells you gives you the bigger picture. And it's the same in maintenance. When you start doing schedule compliance, you also need to look at what are my breakdown rate, what is my rework rate, what is my actual, for example, you can measure how much time am I actually spending actual versus planned, because then you find, I'm planning for work to be done in 8 hours, but I'm only confirming 1 hour. Well, clearly we've got a problem. So either our planning is wrong or our confirmation, and we're not actually doing the work. So that's where you need to have that balance of KPIs where one points to the other. So if one goes out of whack, the other one should show you, something's wrong. And it's understanding that, and then it goes back to understanding your process, which if you don't understand your process, please don't implement KPIs. First understand your process and then implement KPIs, because otherwise you measure the wrong thing and you drive the wrong behavior. I told you just before we started recording, it's probably the one example that stood out to me in my working career. I worked at operations, and they had 3 key KPIs. Now, I'm going to change the language because I don't want to mention...
Throw them under the bus.
Yeah, I don't want to throw them under the bus. That's right. So they were only talking about tons mined, tons crushed, and tons railed, right? And so what they would do is the tons crushed was that important that even if the screen broke and half of your material went out to waste and didn't go to product, they would just keep the crusher going and say, no, you're not stopping the crusher because tons crushed is important. Doesn't matter what quality, doesn't matter that half of the stuff we're throwing away, doesn't matter. It's all about crushed tons. Crushed tons is the only thing we worry about. And that became the mentality. Now, it wasn't a crushing plant, it was actually a processing plant, but that's what they did. And it fascinated me, the conversation when you talk to people. You realize, we're pumping ore that's been processed out into waste and not actually processing it, because in the processing plant there was a breakdown, and now we're just diverting, crushed ore out into the waste. And you go, but you do realize, this is energy that's gone in and we're just wasting it. Yeah, it doesn't matter. We measured on tons crushed, not crushed, but crushed. That's all that matters, And it just fascinated me, and I came to the realization that, when as leaders and as managers, we need to be very careful. What are those, key business KPIs that we really, really push and say this is important? Because what are the unintended behaviors we create or generate or awaken by this business KPI? And to me, that was it was fascinating. I was stunned, to be honest. I had conversations with senior leadership, and I'm like, seriously? Does this make sense? And they all go, yeah, well, it's how we've always been doing it, because that KPI is the most important. That's it. And it blew my mind. And so that's sort of when I realized, you really, the two things, KPIs, drive a behavior, drive an outcome. That's what you're trying to achieve. And if it doesn't do one of those two things, it will always do one of those two things. The question is it doing the right, is it driving the right behavior or the right outcome? And if you've got a set of KPIs in your business, my advice is go and sit down and look at each KPI and say, what am I trying to achieve with this KPI? What behavior, what outcome am I driving with this KPI? And if you can't answer the question, do not use it, because you will eventually drive an unintended outcome out of that.
And I suppose from that, Derick, should you do an annual review of, I suppose, those KPIs? Are they still effective?
Yes, 100%. Because so I'll go back to the safety example, which is if initially when you roll out hazard reporting, you'll say everybody must report at least one hazard per shift. Once people start reporting hazards and it's they actually do it and they meet the KPIs after a year, you go, okay, can hazards now talk about quality of hazards. How many real work came out of that hazard that I've reported, or how many real situations, and so then you look at quality, because that's what you're trying to do, is you're trying actually to reduce hazards. So initially you're just trying to create the culture of reporting, which you're trying to, and then after you review it and you say, okay, now we're looking at real quality. What is the quality of my hazard reporting? And the same in maintenance. If you initially, typically one of the key initial KPIs that I implement normally is I go notifications, right? So my expectation is every tradesperson has to create at least one notification per shift. Why? Because he's walking around the plant. There's always things broken. So my expectation is everybody should raise one notification per shift. But once that becomes culture where people actually raise notifications, you can drop that, and then you start looking at how many notifications comes out of my PMs, because that then refers to your quality of your PMs. So that's, it should ever be evolving. So if you've got a KPI that's always green, the question is, is this sustainable? And can I drop that KPI? Can I put something else in where I can now start improving? And it's not about putting a KPI in where but we start off in red and we can hit people. That's not what it's about. It's about continuously improving, because that's the aim of the game.
Yep. And just in case, notifications are work requests, but obviously the SAT terminology for those who don't know.
Yes. So, Ricky, KPIs, right? What would you say, what's the best tool to measure KPIs?
So, Derick, I'm a little bit biased, as you know. I love Power BI. I think it's a really fantastic tool. There are other good tools out there. I know Google have their own. There's also Tableau for those who use Salesforce, and there are a few others. But yeah, unfortunately, I'm a little bit biased. Power BI, but I like the fact that within Power BI you can have high-level business metrics or KPIs. You can then flow that down into someone's specific role. And then from there, you can also then go into building some more of the leading indicators that allow people to get ahead of time. So, for example, if there's a maintenance leader, he can see that there's a couple of open work orders on a Thursday or a Friday. He can go to his weekend crew. Look, these ones are undone. We really need to make sure they're done and done well. So we can get like a schedule compliance or a PM compliance ahead of time. Or alternatively, he can go, now I see that this week we've had 50% of our breakdowns. You're going to go to the maintenance manager ahead of time and say, hey, this week numbers are going to be bad. But again, he has an explanation as to why. And he kind of avoids ahead of time. But and that sort of then goes, well, actually back to the planner ahead of time, we're going to probably have to reschedule some of these. So, it also creates that sort of lovely way that you can sort of have that. But also then you can have graphs that you can drill down into looking at the table as well. So look at those very specifics for each item.
And so I think for those who don't know yet, so myself and Rick is doing this together, and I'll give Power BI a plug as well. I used to do KPIs on Excel, and then somebody breaks a formula and it's very painful. I think the benefit of using a tool like Power BI is the capability to drill down, and what it does is gives you the actual capability to, when your KPI is red, why, and you drill down to understand why it is. And I think we briefly touched on it earlier, that the importance is about not it's not about the KPI that's red, but it's about understanding what processes have failed, right? So where is my process lacking or failing, or What's the real root cause of why it is. So if you've got a KPI that's read every week, don't lower the measurement, make it green. Rather understand why is it red. There's a reason, and if if this is your reality where you have 50% breakdowns every week, then fine. If you decide to lower that standard, then okay. But it's about understanding your process and where's my process broken. And I think Power BI is a really, really powerful tool to give you that capability to do that drill down and make it easy to understand. So you don't have to look at the KPI and then go and dig around in your CMMS to try and figure out why is it this, and you're jumping between 2 or 3 systems. Power BI can bring it all together, and it's easy.
And that's the other cool thing you can do with Power BI is actually start to build in some of that trend and some of that more advanced analytical stuff. So I know one thing that we sort of didn't touch on in our second episode when we went through a drill through is something like a PM score, whereabouts we've built an algorithm that helps businesses understand the effectiveness of, are their PMs working for them? Because obviously they had a trend down, but it then highlighted which PM specifically with those particular pieces of equipment out on site. So you're able to do those almost advanced analytical algorithms.
Yep.
AI is the word that gets thrown around. I'm a little bit biased as at the end of the day, they're all just giant algorithms and language models. But yeah, and I think having those kind of tools allow not just also the business to see not lagging indicators, and obviously help identify where those issues are to then help the leading indicators drive or at least get back up.
Yep, 100%. All right, Ricky. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the discussion. And if look, I think both of us are very, very passionate when it comes to KPIs, and I think the importance of KPIs, because it's important for a business, but I think it's also important to how you apply it. And my focus often is on how KPIs are applied, because I think it's important, because otherwise it loses its value. If it's a stick, it loses its value, and it's really important to, you can change a business around if you have the right KPIs and people on board, and you're chasing the right things. You're not just chasing numbers on a graph to make it look green. I think that's where it's important. So, any closing thoughts from you, Ricky?
Definitely people engagement is the biggest one. If people aren't engaged, or if people are just throwing in numbers to just make the numbers look good, it's just, you lose people very quickly, and you lose insight of what the end goal of what you're trying to do within business, which is make it better 1% each day.
100%. No, sorry, 1% each day.
That's it.
Thanks for your time, Ricky. Appreciate it. To all our listeners, please like, share, send us your comments. If you've got any questions around KPIs, Power BI, anything we can help with, please reach out, and we'll do what we can to assist or answer your questions, or maybe discuss it on the next topic.
Sounds good. Again, thanks everyone for listening. Thank you for everyone who's commenting, liking, sharing. It means the world to us that you actually listen, and we're not boring you half to death or falling asleep halfway through an episode. So thank you very much. Exciting news. We've got Jason Ryan gave me a call today. He wants to be back next week. So if you're cool with that, Derick, we'll get him on again. Thoroughly enjoyed our conversation last time. Be exciting. He's also was able to get us another guest for a couple of weeks' time as well, who was really, really keen to have a chat with us and bring some stuff to the table. So I'm looking forward to it. And then the very special, while I'm in Bathurst, I'm here for the 12-hour, and I've got a really awesome recording coming up. I've been invited into one of the garages within one of the race teams, sit down with one of their main drivers. Hopefully I'll be able to chat with more than just the driver, hopefully some of the race engineers, some of the mechanics, and get some really cool footage for everybody. It was beautiful up there this morning. watch the sunrise over the top of Bathurst and Mount Panorama. So
Looking forward to that one, Ricky. Unfortunately, when you do that one, I won't be with. So all the best for the recording and enjoy it. I wish I could be there, but I'm not sure where I'm while you're recording. But all the best, and yeah, we're looking forward to seeing having another chat with Jason. This time it will be more around people management. So yeah, good conversation, and looking forward to it. Thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode. Awesome. Thanks, Ricky. Yes, episode 10. So we've survived 10 episodes with a few bloopers in between, and we'll probably make a few more mistakes. Ricky, thanks. It's awesome to be back. Welcome back to you as well. Unfortunately, different parts of the country, although we're both in New South Wales. Actually close to each other, but not close enough to do a live recording tonight. So
when it's your turn to talk and your brain decides to take an unscheduled outage.
Over to you.
not even.
As I said. Okay.
I'm a little bit biased. I think Power BI is probably one of the best out there. It's good in such a way that you can have all those high level business KPIs, and then you can go down to that role specifically, and then you can also flow into. So we've spoken a lot about it's the opposite of leading. Shit.
Lagging.
That's it. Start again.